Last time we spoke about the Marco Polo Bridge incident. On June 7th of 1937, tensions escalated between Japan and China as the Japanese military conducted a training exercise near the Marco Polo Bridge. During the exercise, gunfire erupted, sowing confusion and leading to the unexplained disappearance of one soldier. This incident prompted Japan to demand permission to search the nearby city of Wanping, which was denied by Chinese forces, escalating tensions further. By the next day, Japanese troops attacked, resulting in fierce fighting at the bridge. Under heavy assault, Chinese defenders fought valiantly but faced overwhelming force. As the conflict intensified, both sides struggled with heavy casualties, leading to the full-scale Sino-Japanese War. The Japanese military's aggressive maneuvers and the determined Chinese resistance marked the beginning of quite a brutal conflict, forever altering the landscape of East Asia. The profound toll on both nations foreshadowed the horrors of war that were to come, as China prepared to defend its sovereignty against a relentless enemy. This episode is Operation Chahar. Hello again and welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Craig Watson. But before we start, I just wanted to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia and so much more. So go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcasts over at the Pacific War and Eastern Front Week by Week podcasts, both written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube, and Echoes of War, found on major podcast platforms. I recently released an episode on Japan's government by assassination period. If you'd like to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, about 25 episodes on ongoing, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. By the end of July of 1937, the Japanese had overwhelmed the Beiping-Tianjin region. It's pretty understandable as to how it came so fast. As we have discussed throughout the series, the Japanese had gradually seized control over northern China going back to Operation Nika in 1933. Little by little, they had carved it out. Now, typically when you pull out a map of a war between two nations, usually it's one nation piercing into the other and gradually seizing control of key locations until it achieves victory. However, with the case of the outset of the Second Sino-Japanese War, it's more like the Japanese are starting at multiple key locations where they already have concessions, treaties, and autonomous regions. Thus, it's honestly a huge headache to follow. When the Marco Polo Bridge incident broke out, Chiang Kai-shek had been in Kuling, a mountaintop resort where he had spent his summer vacations. He received the news with composure, but his message to the nation conveyed a sense of optimism and anticipation. The embarrassment of the Xinan mutiny was a thing of the past. Although he wasn't overly confident, he believed that this was the pivotal moment China had been preparing for, more so than any time in the recent years. For nearly 3 weeks, efforts were made to resolve the situation through diplomacy. For the first time, Chiang was in a position to make demands. He understood they would likely be rejected, but that wasn't the main point. He demanded Japan to acknowledge its responsibility for the recent turmoil, to issue a formal apology, and to provide compensation. After making that request, he addressed his nation with a formal commitment. China would not accept any settlement that compromised its sovereignty or its territorial integrity. No changes would be permitted regarding the status of the Hubei Chahar Council. The local officials would not be reassigned at the request of any foreign government. Any restrictions on the 29th Army's positions would be unacceptable. He declared that the era of Japanese expansion in North China had come to a definitive end. The Japanese army achieved significant victories on the battlefield in China, leading to the inevitable expansion of the conflict. The first major campaign followed the Nanyuan victory, unfolded along the mountainous border marked by the Inner Great Wall, separating northern Hubei from Chahar. On the Jinpu Railway, just south of Tianjin, lies a small station known as Qinghai. Adjacent to this station is the Jian River, which had swollen to a width of about 20 meters due to intermittent heavy rains in northern China after the Japanese Army's occupation of Tianjin. The embankments on either side of the river were overgrown with dense reeds and grass, and a wooden arch bridge spanned the river.
After landing at Danguko in Tianjin, the 10th Division, commanded by Lieutenant General Rensuke Isogai, advanced south along the Jinpu Railway. However, as the vanguard, that being the 10th Regiment of the 33rd Brigade, made its way through the muddy terrain towards Jian River's wooden bridge, they were suddenly taken back. A group of Chinese soldiers appeared, their faces vividly painted red and armed with long-handled Dao broadswords, a sight reminiscent of the legendary Chinese figure Guan Yu, as depicted in a lot of traditional portraits. These soldiers belonged to the 26th Independent Brigade of the 38th Division of the 29th Army, who were in a retreat from Tianjin. Following the city's fall, they retreated southwards to Qinghai Station, where they had prepared to make a final stand. Brigadier Commander Li Jiyuan recognized their inferior numbers and weaponry compared to that of the Japanese forces. Drawing from painful lessons learned during the positional battles in Tianjin, he decided to divide his troops strategically. One battalion would defend the station, another would protect the county town, and a third would engage in guerrilla tactics along the Jinpu Road. If faced with a small number of Japanese soldiers, they would fight fiercely. If overwhelmed, they would attempt to encircle the attackers and prevent a direct assault on their main position. Despite the Japanese army's attempts to advance, including efforts to send an armored train into Qinghai Station, the Chinese soldiers cleverly laid straw on the tracks and buried mines, thwarting the train's progress. Once Japanese troops disembarked to mount an offensive, they were ambushed by the battalion executing guerrilla tactics, resulting in a chaotic retreat that left behind several dozen casualties. Over the course of weeks, the divisional headquarters ordered a battalion of Japanese troops to move south along the Jinpu Road, requiring them to cross the Jian River at the wooden bridge. However, the 26th Independent Brigade was assigned to halt this advance, and they would manage to hold their ground for over 20 days. Yet, recognizing the gravity of the situation, Brigadier Commander Li Jiyuan gathered his group and battalion commanders to emphasize the necessity of pushing back the Japanese forces. He passionately rallied them, declaring, "We must defend this river to the death. Each regiment will select a death squad. Each member will carry a long-handled broadsword and 4 grenades, paint their faces red, and rush across the bridge to engage in melee combat." When Li asked for volunteers to lead the death squad, the regimental commander, Jie, eagerly stepped forward, quickly gathering a group that would follow him, uniting passionately to their cause. The death squad charged across the bridge, catching the Japanese completely off guard with their war paint and weapons. The sudden attack left the Japanese soldiers dazed, leading to a chaotic retreat as they struggled through the muddy terrain. Within this chaos, more than 200 long-handled swords struck down a significant number of Japanese troops. Those advancing from behind panicked at the sight of their retreating comrades. An officer dismounted during the chaos, and he was left behind, and the Chinese soldiers, filled with such a zeal, pressed forward, ignoring the orders from their brigade commander Li Jiyuan to fall back to their own safety. Despite moments of heroism, many fell that day by the Jian River, as the officers and soldiers burned their boats and set fire to the wooden bridge, rendering retreat impossible. As the Japanese consolidated its power in the Pingjin region, many leaders underestimated the tenacity of Chinese resistance. Plans were made to defeat the Chinese army and their air force swiftly, aiming to resolve the issue in North China decisively, with no diplomatic negotiations or external interventions allowed during the military operation. Now in late July to early August, Chiang Kai-shek issued orders to improve defenses at Nanko. He mobilized Tang Embo's 13th Army in Sudong for the battle readiness, tasked Liao Ruming to sabotage railways, and directed Fu Zhouyi and Yan Qishan in Suyuan to prepare for conflict. Troops reorganized rapidly, with divisions merging to strengthen the 17th Army under Liao Ruming's command. Chiang insisted that Nanko's defenses be deep and wide to thwart enemy cavalry and tank assaults, rendering Japanese mechanized advantages ineffective. He called for close cooperation amongst commanders and a resolute defense. Tang Embo's 13th Army, consisting of the 4th and 89th Divisions, whom established defensive positions along the Beiping-Siyuan Railway and Nanko, with additional units positioned even further back at Juyongguan. The 13th Army was about 20,000 men strong, all motivated soldiers committed to fighting the Japanese, but their equipment was very inadequate. The 89th Division had a few outdated artillery pieces, while other units were in even worse condition, hampering their effectiveness against the very well-armed Japanese forces. Liao's 17th Army stationed its 84th Division at Jicheng, Yanqing, and Longguan, effectively securing the flank of the 13th Army against potential Japanese advances from Chahar. The 21st Division was deployed to Huailai, situated along the railway to the rear of Tang's forces. Additionally, Zhao Jiangshou's 1st Cavalry Army, Liao's 143rd Division, and 2 peace preservation brigades commenced an offensive against Mongol forces in northern Chahar. As Japan launched initial assaults on Nanko on August the 4th, fierce fighting would erupt. The Chinese defenders fought valiantly, but heavy bombardments by artillery and air raids took a toll. The Japanese began using tanks to support their infantry, yet the 530th Regiment successfully repelled an attack at Denchonko. Meanwhile, the Japanese intensified their efforts, culminating in poison gas assaults that overwhelmed Chinese positions on Longhu-tai, leading to significant losses. Despite the escalating pressure and the casualties, the determination to hold Nanko was unwavering. On August the 5th, the Kwangtung Army requested permission for the advance guard to move to Changpai, arguing that the Central Army's invasion of Chahar had jeopardized the security of Manchukuo. This request was denied, yet the advance guard proceeded to Changpai on August 8th anyways. This unauthorized movement by the Kwangtung Army was a serious act of defiance, as Toulon lay outside Manchukuo's borders and troop deployments required imperial authorization. Although imperial sanctions had been obtained for the move to Toulon on July the 28th, permission for the advance guard to proceed was only granted retroactively, with the stipulation that it would not advance further into Inner Mongolia. Nevertheless, this unauthorized action ultimately compelled the High Command to approve the advance to Changpai. On August the 7th, the Japanese Army launched a large assault on Nanko, with its three main divisions aiming to breach the Great Wall and advance westwards along the Pingshui Railway to flank the strategic city of Shanxi. By August the 8th, the Japanese forces had captured Beiping and Tianjin. They deployed the entire 20th Division, commanded by Lieutenant General Kawagishi Fumasiburo, and supplemented their efforts with the 5th and 10th Divisions, along with the Sakai Brigade, to attack Nanko along the Pingshui Railway. On the 8th, the Japanese 11th Independent Mixed Brigade, led by General Shigeyasu Suzuki, initiated an attack on the left flank of the 13th Corps position in Nanko. However, their efforts were halted after 3 days due to challenging terrain and determined resistance. On that same day, Chiang ordered the activation of the 14th Group Army, comprising the 10th, 83rd, and 85th Divisions, under General Wei Lihang. Elements of the 14th Group Army traveled by rail from Yingchaichong to Yi County, and then they embarked on a 10-day march through the plains west of Beiping to flank and support Tang Gongbo's forces. Meanwhile, the Chinese First Army region launched attacks against the Japanese in Liangshan and Chaili to divert their attention and dispatched a detachment to Hailong Pass to cover the advance of the 14th Group Army. On August 9th, the Central High Command ordered the China Garrison Army to eliminate resistance in the area and instructed the Kwangtung Army commander, Yuda Kenkichi, to send reinforcements from Johul and Inner Mongolia to support the operation. The China Garrison Army deployed its 11th Independent Mixed Brigade and the 5th Division, recently arrived from Hiroshima, under Lieutenant General Itsugaki Seishiro, to launch an attack on the mountainous regions around Nanko and Pataling within the Great Wall. Following intense fighting, they succeeded in crossing into Chahar. The Kwangtung Army aimed to conquer Chahar, and upon receiving approval from the Japanese General Staff, established an expeditionary headquarters on the 14th, led by its Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Hideki Tojo. And yes, it is that Tojo. Tokyo's objective was to secure the strategic flank of Manchukuo, while the Kwangtung Army sought to create puppet regimes in northern China and integrate the occupied territories into a Japanese sphere of influence. The Chahar Expeditionary Force comprised 3 mixed brigades, including Japan's only fully mechanized unit, which was equipped with medium tanks, heavy and light armored vehicles, and some light tanks. The Japanese troops shifted their main attack towards Zhangjiakou via the Pingshui Railway due to pressures from the Kwangtung Army eager to occupy Inner Mongolia, Sichuan, and Chahar. They sought to eliminate threats from the rear before launching further operations along the Pinghang Line and the Jinpu Line. The 11th Independent Mixed Brigade of the 20th Division of the Chinese Garrison Army was ordered to assault Chinese defenders in the Nanko area, with the ultimate goal of capturing key locations on the Great Wall, like Badaling, which would facilitate the 5th Division's advance. The Chinese assessed the Japanese strategy, believing that they would first secure critical points along the Pingshui route to facilitate further incursions into Shanxi and Zhongding. They understood that holding the Nanko line was vital for both logistical support and tactical maneuvering. Nanko, a key town on the Pingshui Railway connecting Beijing to Zhangjiakou and Baotou, was surrounded by mountains and the Great Wall, making it a significant natural defensive line. As the Japanese army aimed to capture Zhangjiakou and divide their forces into Shanxi and Sichuan, the Chinese army control over Nanko became crucial. A renewed assault on the 11th, bolstered by tanks and aircraft, successfully captured Nanko Station, allowing General Suzuki's brigade to advance towards Juyong Pass. On the 12th, Tang and Bo's army launched a counterattack, encircling the Japanese forces and severing their supply and communication lines. That day, Tang and Bo sent a telegram to Liu Fengui. Brother Fengui, Commander Liu of the 529th Regiment, I have received your telegram. Your regiment has recently defeated formidable enemies, laying the groundwork for our army's future victories. Your efforts bring great relief to me. The Nanko position is critical to our nation's war of resistance. Despite the enemy's numerical superiority and fierce artillery fire, we cannot surrender this area. It is our fighting spirit, not our numbers or advanced weaponry, that will help us withstand this powerful foe. We vow never to abandon our positions. Life is transient, and we must embrace our fate. A hero perishing on the battlefield is the glorious destiny of any soldier. On that same day, he also sent a telegram to Wang Zhonglian. Brother Jiren Wang, commander of the 89th Division, I have read your telegram. Brigade Li has triumphed against formidable foes, establishing a precedent for our army's victory. Your successes bring me much comfort. The Nanko position is our glorious objective. If I perish, the country lives on. If I survive, the country perishes. We would rather die defending this position than live in disgrace. Please convey to all the officers and soldiers of your division who share in this struggle the importance of striving for ultimate victory. On the 13th, Tong Yanbo ordered his defensive positions at Nanko to be abandoned as remaining troops pulled back to stronger positions at Badiling and Juyongguan. A renowned journalist at the time, Fan Changjiang, noted Tang Yanbo's physical and emotional toll, describing him as a mere shadow of his former self after enduring relentless battles without any rest. His subsequent thoughts and fears reflected the despair of facing insurmountable odds, with the Japanese army overwhelming the Nanko defenses. Casualty reports from the Battle of Nanko revealed stark discrepancies. Average estimates suggest Chinese losses neared 26,000, while the Japanese casualties were something like 2,600, an alarming ratio of about 10 to 1. Despite the devastating defeat, Tang Yanbo's leadership gained national recognition for his efforts, though he viewed the loss of Nanko as a blemish on his otherwise honorable defense. The indomitable spirit displayed during the relentless struggle at Nanko, despite the defeat and challenges they faced, inspired a sense of resilience amongst the Chinese people, reminding them that even in these dire circumstances, they were not to yield to oppression. Meanwhile, in response to having their supply and communication lines severed, on the 14th, Seshiro Itagaki dispatched the 5th Division to relieve the 11th Independent Mixed Brigade at Juyongguan. Fu Xiuyi's troops attacked Chahar from Sudong. Zhang Chewu's troops attacked Shangdu and recaptured on the 14th, while Xu Yusan's troops attacked Duhua and captured it on the 16th. By the 16th, Itagaki had arrived at Nanko and initiated an enveloping assault targeting the right flank of the 13th Army, executing a 5-pronged attack at Huangnaoyuan. In anticipation, the 7th Brigade of the 4th Division, commanded by Shi Jue, was positioned to counter this maneuver. Reinforcements including Li Xianzhou's 21st Division and Zhu Huabing's 94th Division were brought in, resulting in several days of intense fighting. On the 17th, General Yan Xishan, the director of the Taiyuan Pacification Headquarters, ordered the 7th Army Group, commanded by Fu Xiuyi, to move the 72nd Division and 3 additional brigades by rail from Dazhong to Huailai to support Tang Yanbo's forces. Chiang Kai-shek urged steadfastness in the face of adversity, emphasizing that retreat was no longer an option. But with communication breakdowns and logistical challenges, Tang Yanbo faced dilemmas that would lead him to issue the order for his troops to break out on the 26th. As the Japanese army occupied Huailai and Yongqing, Tang Yanbo's forces executed a withdrawal, retreating via various routes before suffering some further losses. Meanwhile, Liu Ruming's troops from the 143rd Division of the 29th Army took Jiangbei from Jiangjiakou. They proceeded to Wanquangdam, the junction of Wanquan and Jiangbei. The members of the pseudo-Mongolian military government then fled to Duolun under the leadership of King Due. In order to relieve the danger in Jiangjiakou, Li Ruming's troops began to attack the enemy in Jiangbei. On the 20th, they captured key positions such as Balitai village outside Jiangbei city. At this time, the mechanized troops of the Kwangtung Army, led by Hideki Dojo, rushed from Rehe to support Jiangbei. When passing through Guiyuan, they were divided into 2 groups. One group of Japanese troops, the Suzuki Brigade, and the other being the Homa Brigade, went south to attack Jiangjiakou. On the night of the 21st, the Chinese army retreated to Shenweitai, 25 kilometers south of Jiangbei County. On the 22nd, the Japanese army began their attack. Shenwei Tower fell at midnight on the 23rd. At the same time, another part of the Japanese army launched a roundabout attack at Wancheng County. On the morning of the 24th, they captured Wancheng County before heading straight for Jiangjiakou, along the highway with an infantry regiment and artillery battalion. From the 25th to the 27th, the Japanese army attacked Bajiaotai, the highest point of the Sur Mountain west of Jiangjiakou. By noon on the 27th, Jiangjiakou had fallen. Guo Guji's 17th Army marched to Dushoukou to resist the enemy from Zhoulun and Longguan as he intercepted the Pingshuo Railway. Gao Guji's troops failed to withstand the Japanese attack, and the 301st Regiment of the 29th Army, stationed in Xianhua, also retreated southwards. By the 28th, Shuahua fell into the hands of the Japanese. Meanwhile, in northern Chahar, the Chinese 1st Cavalry Army successfully captured Changde, Naohuchan, Xiangyi, and Huade from the puppet Mongolian army led by King De. Elements of the 143rd Division secured Zhongli, while the main force advanced to Zhangbei. During this Chinese offensive, the Japanese Chahar Expeditionary Force, consisting of the mechanized 1st Independent Mixed Brigade, along with the 2nd and 15th Mixed Brigades, prepared for the counteroffensive from Zhangbei to Kalgan. Tojo personally commanded the units of the 1st Independent Mixed Brigade during Operation Chahar, which would serve as his only real combat service for his entire career. From August 18th to the 19th, the Chahar Expeditionary Force launched a counterattack from Zhangbei, capturing Shangwei Taikao on the Great Wall and the Hannou Dam. The scattered and ill-equipped Chinese forces were unable to halt the Chinese advance, which now threatened the Beiping-Siyuan Railway at Kalgan. On the 20th, General Fu Zouyi's 7th Group Army diverted its 200th and 211th Brigades, which had been moving south by rail, to join General Tang Yenbo's forces back to defend Kalgan. Fu Zouyi's remaining 72nd Division arrived to reinforce Champien, while his 7th Separate Brigade was dispatched to protect the railway head at Hualai. On the 21st, the Japanese forces breached the defenses at the villages of Heilongcheng and Chongbyangcheng. General Tang Yenbo's forces, awaiting reinforcements, had suffered over 50% casualties, but they continued to defend Huailai, the Jiang Pass, and Yangqing. Liu Roming's 143rd Division retreated to safeguard Kalgan from the advancing Japanese troops. On the 23rd, as Seishiro Itagaki's 5th Division advanced towards Huailai from Champien against Ma Shenyou's 7th Separate Brigade, advanced elements of the 14th Army Group arrived on the Japanese flank at Qingpaokou. They successfully drove off the Japanese outpost and made contact with the Japanese forces advancing towards Champien. However, delays in crossing the Yongding River postponed their attack until it was far too late to halt the Japanese advance. Due to poor communications, they also failed to coordinate with General Tang Yenbo's forces during the battle. After 8 days and nights of fierce fighting, on the 24th, Itagaki linked up with the Kwangtung Army's 2nd Independent Mixed Brigade at Shahuanyan. By the 24th, the Japanese army had breached the defensive line of Wang Wanling's division along the western parts of Hongling as they crossed the Great Wall and advanced into the Huailai area. At this time, the Japanese forces attacking Jiangjiakou from Jiaibei also secured control over the railway line west of Jiangjiakou, posing a significant threat to the Chinese defenders at Nanko. On the 25th, the Chinese defenders were compelled to withdraw from Nanko and to retreat to Juyongguan. By the 27th, they received orders to break out and relocate southward, completely evacuating the Nanko battlefield. Since Wei Lihuang's troops lost their intended target for reinforcement, and Baoding, along with the Ping'an line, they were in a state of emergency, so they engaged the enemy in the Wanping area for over a month before retreating south. Following the abandonment of both Nanko and Juyongguan, the Japanese army invaded Huailai City on the night of the 27th. The Chinese army suffered over 16,000 casualties, while the Japanese army reported more than 15,000 casualties. Back on the 26th, General Tang Yenbo's forces were ordered to break out towards Shangqian River, while Liu Roming's troops were directed to withdraw to the opposite side of the Xiangying River. On the 29th, a Japanese unit known as the Oi Column, as it was called by the Chinese, and the Oizumi Detachment by the Japanese launched an attack. According to Xu Longqian, this unit moved south from Dushoukou on the 30th and attacked Yongqing via Qicheng, but they were soon repelled by the Chinese 17th Army. The unit had moved to Guiyuan by August 25th and reached Shuahai by September 7th, effectively cutting the railway behind Tang's forces to the east of the Chinese defenders along the Great Wall. Following the repulsion of the Wei Column's attack, the Chinese 17th Army withdrew to join the rest of Tang Yenbo's forces on the far side of the Songjiang River. Kalgan fell to the Japanese on the 27th. After General Fuzhouyi's 200 and 211th Brigades failed in their counterattack to recapture Kalgan, Fuzhouyi's forces retreated to the west to defend the railway to Seiyuan at Jaikou-Pao. On the 30th, the Army High Command ordered the task force and the China Garrison Army to occupy Chahar Province. The North China Area Army deployed Lieutenant General Itagaki Seshiro's 5th Division, the theater strategic reserve for this operation. The Japanese forces relied on armored units to breach the Chinese defenses and utilized railway lines to transport troops and supplies effectively to critical locations throughout Chahar. Although the 1st Independent Mixed Brigade's tanks and armored cars demonstrated proficiency, the Kwangtung Army's assessment of the operation criticized the armored units for their lack of shock effect and frequent mechanical breakdowns. Additionally, these vehicles required significant supplies and maintenance, leading the Army to deem them ineffective in combat situations. The 2nd Air Group provided crucial support for the ground offensive in Chahar. From mid-August, this air group, stationed at Chengde and Jingzhou, conducted bombing raids on enemy positions and transport routes. They also performed reconnaissance missions and even airdropped supplies to encircle Japanese forces. To match the rapid advance of the mechanized ground forces, air units were repositioned to advance airfields. After bombing Taiyuan in late August, some units returned to their home bases, leaving behind 2 fighter squadrons and 2 heavy bomber squadrons, which formed a provisional air regiment. By mid-September, the 5th Division and the Chahar Expeditionary Force were advancing southwest through the rugged mountains of Shanxi Province, as they captured Daitong on September the 13th. 5 days later, anticipating a decisive battle, Lieutenant General Katsuyuki ordered the 5th Division to pivot southeast towards Baoding to encircle the retreating Chinese forces. Shortly after repositioning, Itagaki learned from aerial reconnaissance that Chinese units were assembling near Pingxingguan. Concerned that these forces might advance eastwards through the pass and threaten his rear, Itagaki dispatched a regimental-sized task force under the command of Major General Murakeiji, leader of the 21st Brigade, to disperse the enemy troops and control the road on both sides of the pass. Mura's task force departed by truck in mid-afternoon on the following day, but the overland movement proved much slower and much more challenging than anticipated. Traveling along a single, rugged dirt track through some steep mountains, the 49 trucks carrying his infantry and heavy weapons, including crew-serving machine guns and battalion artillery, could only manage a speed of about 7 miles per hour. By the late afternoon, the lead elements were still about 5 miles east of the pass when they encountered a few hundred Chinese troops, who had retreated after a brief firefight. As the night fell, the Japanese moved cautiously forward and reached a village approximately a mile from the pass, where they would encounter some stiff resistance, including motor and automatic weapons fire. After successfully repelling a counterattack by the Chinese 73rd Division, Mura launched a night assault. Supported by pack artillery and heavy machine guns, 2 Japanese companies pushed through the pass and seized some high ground on its west side by the early morning. However, Chinese reinforcements soon arrived and attempted to reclaim the lost territory, resulting in an ongoing fight for the heights on September the 24th. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist 115th Division, comprising the 685th, 686th, and 687th Regiments of the 8th Route Army, consisting of over 6,000 effective troops under the command of one 29-year-old Lin Biao, maneuvered south around the Japanese rear. By the 24th of September, they had to interpose themselves on the road east of the pass, effectively cutting off Mura's task force from its supply base. That same day, the Central Army's 71st Division launched several sharp counterattacks against Mura's outnumbered forces west of the pass, threatening to overrun the Japanese positions. The Central Army Communist forces had planned to attack both flanks of the Japanese at dawn of September the 25th, but torrential rains delayed the advance of the Central Army's reserves. The downpour also muffled the sounds of the approaching Japanese night assault. Utilizing this poor night security of the Chinese, Japanese assault parties surprised the 71st and 84th Divisions, pushing them from their positions west of the pass. Mura mistakenly believed he controlled both sides of the pass, and he assumed the Chinese forces were in a full retreat. Unbeknownst to him, Lin Biao's troops had blocked the eastern entrances to the pass, prompting him to order a resupply column with rations and ammunition forward from about 15 miles east of the pass to replenish his depleted task force. The supply train, consisting of 70 horse-drawn wagons and 80 trucks, struggled to make progress along the single dirt track, where sections had become muddy bogs due to the heavy rains. Most of the 100-plus soldiers handling the horses and the wagons were untrained and unarmed. The few regular service corps soldiers carrying only about 10 cavalry carbines with a single infantry platoon of 30 men provided all of the security. The 80 trucks transported another 176 men, most of whom were not infantry either. Therefore, the resupply column was ill-prepared for any trouble. Following a sunken road worn down by centuries of caravans, the column approached the pass through a narrow, man-made defile, as its sides rose about high as 35 feet above the track. Around mid-morning, about 4 miles east of the pass, the Chinese Communist 115th Division launched an ambush. Communist troops rained grenades and small arms fire from their high ground overlooking the road onto the trapped convoy. Although the Japanese fought back desperately, the combination of surprise, advantageous terrain, and overwhelming numbers turned the road into a killing zone. The ambush decimated almost all of the teamsters and the infantrymen who protected the wagons. At his field headquarters, Muda heard the heavy gunfire and the explosions, and he quickly ordered a battalion-sized rescue force to assist the convoy. However, the Chinese 685th Regiment blocked the only road to the trapped supply train. They halted the Japanese battalion. Elements of the 685th and 686th Regiments then finished off the motorized convoy, with only 5 trucks at the rear escaping. After looting the weapons, equipment, and clothing, the Communists burned the remaining vehicles and withdrew southwest into the rugged mountains. Although the Communists claim to have killed 3,000 Japanese troops, the more realistic number is about 200. Nonetheless, Lin Biao's guerrillas had achieved a significant tactical success. While the 115th Division destroyed the Japanese resupply column east of the pass, the Central Army's 6th and 7th Army groups, including the 71st Division, launched a series of day and night assaults against Muda's dispersed units west of the pass. Both sides incurred heavy losses, and the Japanese struggled to maintain control of the high ground as the Chinese fanned out through the valleys and attacked from all sides. Isolated and under heavy attack, the Japanese were low in ammunition, food, and water, lacking proper cold weather clothing in a frigid mountain terrain, and they were greatly outnumbered. Thus, they resorted to scavenging ammunition and weapons from the fallen Chinese soldiers. Itagaki promptly ordered his 41st and 21st Infantry Regiments, supported by another infantry regiment from the Kwangtung Army, located about 50 miles northeast of the pass, to rescue the beleaguered task force. These regiments moved along the narrow mountain road amidst some heavy rain, which really slowed their progress. The relief force split up about 40 miles north of Pingxinguan, with the 21st Regiment swinging northwest to outflank the Chinese, while the other 2 regiments continued towards the pass. To the northwest, the 15th Brigade of the Chahar Expeditionary Force advanced southeast from Dantong to encircle the Chinese. Central Army forces defending along the inner Great Wall, about 50 miles northwest of Pingxinguan, inflicted substantial casualties on the Japanese. The Japanese 41st Regiment finally reached Muda on September the 28th, and on that same day, the 21st Regiment dislodged the stubborn defenders along the inner Great Wall, roughly 40 miles northwest of the pass, disrupting the entire Chinese defense and threatening to surround the besieged forces. Nonetheless, fighting continued throughout September the 29th, when the 2nd Brigade broke through the Chinese Central Army's defenses and advanced westward. Facing potential encirclement and certain destruction, the Japanese 6th Army Group withdrew southwest the following day. Japanese accounts do not specify overall losses, but Chinese reports claim nearly 3,000 Japanese casualties, while acknowledging they suffered 10 times that number. After 5 days of intense fighting in rugged terrain, Muda's forces managed to hold their ground, but their heavy losses and those sustained by the relief columns rendered it a Pyrrhic victory. Both Communist and Nationalist Chinese forces retreated southwest, surviving to fight another day. The determination of the Chinese Central Army in both the offensive and defensive maneuvers, combined with the skillful hit-and-run tactics of the Communist 115th Division, inflicted significant damage on the Japanese, and it became a cornerstone of Chinese propaganda going forth. On October the 1st, the Japanese General Staff ordered the North China Area Army to destroy the Chinese forces in Shanxi Province, which was estimated to number over 20 divisions from either the Shanxi Army or the Central Army, and they were fortifying positions in Taiyuan, Yangchuan, and Wanping. The Japanese 5th and 20th Divisions advanced towards Taiyuan, while the 15th Division, reinforced by a mixed brigade, launched an assault south from Yangping. The 15th Division quickly encountered strong Chinese resistance and well-prepared defenses, which would halt their advance. From October the 19th to the 26th, the 20th Division faced 13 Chinese divisions entrenched near Jiguan. Although they successfully repelled numerous fierce counterattacks, the division was unable to breach the Chinese lines. A maneuver by one of its regiments to the rear of the Chinese defenses forced a withdrawal of the Chinese troops, however. The reconstituted 5th Division joined the pursuit of the retreating Chinese forces on November the 3rd, reaching Taiyuan 5 days later. Meanwhile, the 20th Division, moving westwards, inflicted heavy losses on the Chinese units that were withdrawing from Taiyuan. Overall, given that the offensive aimed to secure territory, it came to be considered a tactical and operational success. Shortly thereafter, all Japanese forces except for the 20th Division withdrew from Shanxi Province, however. The Chahar campaign concluded with the Kwangtung Army in control of Chahar, Seiyuan, and the northern half of Shanxi Province. The Japanese quickly established puppet regimes in their captured territories. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. Hey, don't forget about our sister podcasts over at the Eastern Front and Pacific War Week by Week podcasts, both written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel over at YouTube, and Echoes of War found on major podcast platforms. Over on both of these, I just released an episode covering Japan's government by assassination period. If you'd like to further support me, please consider checking out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, which is about 25 episodes and ongoing, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next. In July of 1937, tensions between Japan and China erupted following the Marco Polo Bridge incident, leading to fierce fighting as Japanese troops attacked everywhere. Chinese defenders under the command of Chiang Kai-shek bravely resisted despite overwhelming odds, determined to protect their sovereignty. The Battle at Nanko saw relentless assaults, tank warfare, and desperate defensive tactics, revealing the depth of Chinese resolve.